This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Kathy Worthington. Welcome to Late Boomers. Our special guest today is a retired and decorated Navy SEAL officer who parlayed his experience in the military to become a successful business leader, author, and sought-after motivational speaker.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Marty Strong's passion is influencing change. With the world changing so much as we speak, I know our boomer audience will be interested to hear what he has to say. Welcome, Marty.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.
Yeah. You grew up in a military family, and so you lived in different countries. And how do you think this influenced you and led you to the choices you've made in your life as a younger man and today?
Well, I think, and this would be the same whether you moved around a lot because of the military or because one of your parents happened to be in a business where they had to relocate a lot. You end up with a lot of emotional maturity and kind of psychological resilience because you're always switching friends. In my case, I'm switching football jerseys, colors of football jerseys and things. And you play for one team, all of a sudden you're at another high school in another state, and you're playing for another team. And at the time, of course, it's terrible. As a kid, like most human beings, you're looking for stability, you're looking for some longevity so you can set up relationships and all that. But you really don't understand how it makes you stronger for the future. Because later when you're an adult and say somebody finds out they have to move maybe just to the other side of the city, emotionally they break down. It's such a terrible thing. I can walk to where I buy my food. I like the neighborhood, and it's really a big hit, right? And I'm listening to that going like, yeah, try going from Nebraska to Japan or from Japan to, and that I think it's a strength. And I think that also, going into the military for 20 years, I was obviously traveling a lot there too. So you end up being less attached to just a physical place all the time, and you get more a sense of yourself, kind of like knowing your body in space as a gymnast. You kind of know your own mind and personality and your what you like, what you don't like, your own value system and everything, because you're not tied down to one particular format or context.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's a good answer.
Too. I do too. We'll talk about your time as a Navy SEAL and also about the rigorous training a Navy SEAL has to undergo.
Well, so when I first came in the SEAL teams, they were highly classified, and there were no movies, there were no TV shows. Actually, there were no books. The closest thing to anything related to the SEALs was a movie with Richard Widmark called The Frogmen, which many of the Vietnam era SEALs cite as their reason for joining the Navy to become frogmen. So it shows you the power of the cultural media. So that meant that I didn't really know much about it. I didn't know really what I was getting into. It's a volunteer organization. In those days, it was mostly word of mouth, and one person led you to another person. You eventually found out who you had to put an application in with. I ended up showing up because there was a mistake in my orders, so I didn't even volunteer to go there. And the Master Chief, who was talking to me when I arrived there, talked me into volunteering. Now I'm 18 years old, so I'm pretty much malleable.
Yeah.
Especially if some guy's sitting there the whole.
Malleable.
Yeah, and I mean, he's sitting there. He's got a big chest full of medals, and he's very, very smooth talker and very fatherly. And I thought, he goes, hey, if you don't make it, it's a volunteer thing. You can quit. You're not going to get in trouble or anything. And the Navy will send you where you were supposed to go in the first place. So, like a dummy, I said, sure, I'll try this. And that's how I got into the SEAL teams. Now it's a much, much more manufactured process. It's on purpose because they need a lot of them. So when I made it through training, we had 126 guys that started my class, and 13 of us graduated 6 months later.
Oh,
And
Boy.
yeah, and of those 13, two were kicked out of their first SEAL team before they even showed up because they got in trouble racing a car or something. And so out of my whole 13-person class, 11 of us actually got to start being SEALs as a profession. So that's a heck of an attrition rate. We lost another one during the first 4 months of the training at the SEAL team I was assigned to, which is a SEAL Team 2. So now we're starting basically with 10 that made it through the basic, the intermediary training, and ended up getting the gold Eagle badge, which we call the Budweiser. And that just
right.
means that you've made it through the basic intermediate. You're not really a SEAL yet. So those are pretty tough odds, right?
And what year was that? What year?
I went into training in I think it was end of summer of '77. Graduated at the end of the spring of '77, and went to Army Jump School in Fort Benning, which again they don't do anymore. They have their own jump school, and then showed up at SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast in Virginia. So I was there for 8 years. And an interesting thing in my career is I was an enlisted SEAL. And at the end of 8 years, I went to the SEAL Training Command on the West Coast, same place I'd gone through the basic training. And I was the senior enlisted instructor in that first phase. I worked for the lieutenant who was in charge of all of it. So one of my main duties was managing Hell Week, which is what everybody hears about as the crucible. You don't sleep for 5 days and all that. And the biggest shock to me, and this is kind of an insight to the training, it was conveyed to all of us by the instructors as we were going through as students that it was all chaos and it was random. We would be told we're going to go to a class, then they'd be mad at us for some reason, tell us to form up out on the beach, and they'd take us on a 9-mile sand run. So that was the punishment for getting in trouble. We weren't even sure how we got in trouble, why we got in trouble, but suddenly we're on the beach. They'd tell us we're going to do, a 2-mile run, and it would turn it into a 12-mile run. They'd tell us we were going to, basically, they're constantly telling us something that was not correct. And that was part of the conditioning, but it was also part of setting the experiment up, because they weren't going to cause us to fail or quit or anything. We were going to do it to ourselves. Everybody was going to have their own opinion of whether they could handle this chaos and uncertainty. And people just started, punching out on their own. They said, I can't handle this. I don't know what's going on. I can't plan for anything. I can't hold back today for tomorrow, because tomorrow's the day that we're going to do something. You just basically had to keep putting one foot in front of the other and trying to execute at the best you could. And I thought that was the way it was. So I show up, 8 years later, and the very first event that I walk in the instructor office to witness is a 14-mile run in combat boots on the sand.
Oh,
gosh.
And they've got this big, long board going from one end of the room to the other, and there's a complete mission briefing on it, like it was a SEAL mission, like a combat mission. Everybody has assignments, radio, primary, secondary, and tertiary radio call signs, radio frequencies, 2 different kinds of radios. There was vehicles. There was all kinds of watering points, where the medical points were going to be. And I'm looking at all this, and I turned to one of the other guys and I said, why is this so overmanaged? He says, we do everything like this. It's always been this way. You just didn't know it when you were going through.
Somebody set that up.
Wow.
So it was like you were.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like you were at Wally World, and people just popped out of a bush in the ground and grabbed a piece of trash, so you couldn't see what was going on. And then so that's the first part, right? That is heavily choreographed, heavily observed, heavily managed, heavily supervised, and yet it's kind of hidden from the students, so they don't perceive that. The second thing was, I think like most people going in, I still thought it was mostly a physical exercise. It was a physical contest. And as an instructor, it only took me about a month and a half till I realized it has nothing to do with that. It's all psychology. It's all what's going on between their ears. I have a speech program I called the Voices in Your Head. And it's basically all those that inner critic that gets you to the point where you go from risk calculation to just fear of failure, and you just start calculating, how am I going to get out of this? You start coming up with your draft escape plan, your draft I quit message, and you could watch the students. You could see it in their eyes. You could see the light bulb kind of turning out, and they just look dull. And you could also kind of compare that to the students that seem to be very kind of lit up, energized, not like cheerleader energized, but just like a soft intensity, like they were going with it and they weren't going to quit. And the other thing that was kind of a companion to that was a sense of humor. Pretty much every single solitary person in the SEALs, the Green Berets, all have an incredible sense of humor. They're all like stand-up comics. And I think that's one of those, it's an escape mechanism sometimes collectively, but it's also kind of a personal way of looking at bad things. Something happens to you, you can kind of roll with it and go, oh, whatever, or somebody else can say something funny about what happened to you. And you're like, it just makes light of it and puts it in its perspective, and anyway, it's over. So put one foot in front of the other. So that's when I learned that it wasn't about the physical part, that the whole contest, the whole crucible was set up as an environment to let these young men go through and make their own decisions. And what you get out of that are people that think that way and are capable of dealing with all that uncertainty. And that's what you train. That's the raw material of what becomes a Navy SEAL.
Wow. Well, I've heard that one Navy SEAL motto is the only easy day was yesterday. Would you tell us how that can work as a motto for business leaders? And we're pivoting here, but can you give us some effective business lessons and principles and pointers on how to address the kind of change that you were referring to earlier and chaos?
Sure. So I want to screw this up. There was a class, it was before my class, but not that long, maybe a year and a half before my class. And every class comes up with what's called a class T-shirt. Now that started sometime in the early 70s. And you would go to a local T-shirt shop. You couldn't wear it because you weren't a graduate yet, but those were called your class shirt. But you had to come up with something. You had to come up with an image, and you had to come up with a saying. So they came up with the only easy day is yesterday. I have no idea if they took that from a song. I don't know where they found it, but eventually it kind of encapsulated. There's two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is it's never going to get any easier. You just basically have to suck it up because it get worse and worse and worse. That's one way of looking at it. Yesterday was a good time compared to what's going to happen today, kind of thing. The other way I like to look at it is the way when I give presentations to military guys, mostly SEALs, that are leaving the service, and they're leaving having wonderful careers, and everybody in the United States knows who they are, because now we have books and movies and everything, and they're leaving on a high point, right? And I have a presentation I give to them that's called "Thank You for Your Service," and that's the first slide. And then the second slide is "Now what?" ? And the third slide is "Who cares?" ? Because I think the only easy day is yesterday means if you won the Olympic gold yesterday, you basked in that yesterday. Now you have to prepare for the next Olympic competition or the next race. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win. You've got to keep putting everything into this game. You have to keep producing. You have to keep improving. And that's really what I think the only easy day was yesterday means, is that you're on a journey of continuous self-improvement, whether it's intellectual, psychological, physical, whatever, emotional. And therefore, it can be kind of a mantra, a positive mantra, rather than it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse, which I think is kind of a negative way to look at it. The takeaways as far as practicality, everything I just said will resonate with anybody, whether they're in the military or not. It's I'm actually just started my fourth business book. It's not really a business book; it's a fourth book, and it's the
And
title
I wanted to
is.
ask you, can I ask you before that? Because we are going to talk about your books, but I wanted to also ask you about being a UBS investment advisor, and now you are the CEO of a healthcare company. and a board member of 2 technology companies. So I'm assuming your training as a SEAL led you to form these teams in the business world. And what would you say is the single biggest difference between the 2 paradigms?
So the transition and the working title I have is infinite focus. It's about personal development. So it doesn't matter if you're a SEAL, it doesn't matter if you're a business person. It doesn't matter if you're a business person, you're running a healthcare company, or you're running a financial services firm, or you're a participant in a company. The idea of that is that you are always going to be focusing on your performance, short range focus, which is what most people think of the word focus, or discipline. But the other thing is you have to focus on what the end game is, what the outcome is that you're reaching for. And that's the long range focus. So there's actually 2 different kinds of focus. There's the short range focus that allows you the discipline, the habit forming, the repeat behaviors that gets you, through the productive part of getting something accomplished, or phases of things. And then there's that long-term outlook. What am I focusing on the horizon? It's a cup of coffee way down there. It's a certain dollar amount. It's whatever it is that you're focusing on. And that translates, and it translated as a UBS guy, because I started from scratch with that too. Didn't have any clients, didn't have any rich friends. And I had ended up, after 8 years, doing high net worth management. It was all fee based, and I was a portfolio manager. And I had to learn it every single day, kind of like your own only easy day was yesterday thing. But it was all learnable as long as you had the attitude that my job is to learn this and get better at this. Not just, most people think about the numbers, but really it was about human nature, because
You were
everybody
very
treats money
humble to do
differently. And
that.
you've got people, yeah, I mean, people come in there and they've just got their whole life savings was it sunk into business. They just sold it and they're sitting there with $2 million and they're shaking like this. They've never had that kind of money before. They had no problem making hard calls as a business owner, and they went through all the strife and the journey to start a business all the way through. But the idea that they had this money and they might blow it, they're freaking out. People that inherit money, same thing. I'd never been around anybody with a lot of money, so I had to learn things I didn't think I was going to have to learn. It had nothing to do with the markets. That stuff I kind of understood, or it's easier to learn. It had to do with human nature. And ironically, what they're looking for in an advisor, somebody that's helping them, is leadership. They don't really need a therapist. They don't need somebody who's just going to listen to them and say, "I hear your pain," or that kind of stuff. What they're looking for, they're looking for someone who's going to sit there and tell them, "We've got a handle on this. We can create something that protects what you have, and we can build on it slowly. We don't have to take big chances. Let me put together a plan." That's leading. You're leading them towards a comfort or a calm space related to this fear they have about money. I never would have thought that, right? The second thing is, I talked to people that were self-made. Most of my high net worth people were self-made millionaires. Most of them had been bankrupt a couple of times. I thought if you went bankrupt, you couldn't do anything after that. It was like you were done. No, it was part of the learning process. That's the way they looked at it, looking back at their lives. They also, you'd think that if you had all the money in the world, right? You have $10 million in the bank and you got some big house and you got boats and everything. You'd think that person would be happy, or you think that person would be in a good place. And you find out when they want to talk to you, they don't want to talk to you about their money. They want to talk to you about the son-in-law they can't stand, or the daughter that won't listen to them, or it's regular people stuff. It's just like talking to the guy next door, or talking to the woman at the grocery store. It's regular human. So I said, all right, so I have to understand human nature, and these aren't SEALs. These are civilians. These are not people I've been around for 20 years. These are a different kind of person. SEALs, you look at them and you say, "Are you good?" "Yeah, I'm good." They're not going to sit there and go, "No, I've got all these problems." So I went from that extreme to normal people, which to me felt like it was an extreme until I realized this is the way most people
Right.
are.
But
So I
you
was able
had
to
already built into you, you had a very high tolerance for chaos. It was built into your training, it was built into your
yeah,
psychology. So
yeah.
you could
My
tolerate all
family
that
got
change.
my family divorce caused me to get smart about who
Oh,
I was, and a lot of the moving had to do with the divorce. So I was a stronger person at 18 years old than a lot of people were, at 24, 25, because I was
Yeah.
emotionally strong. And
Yeah.
then you go through the training and you're around those kinds of guys, and they're putting you through more chaos later on. They're trying to trip you up. They're throwing all kinds of crazy stuff at you. Then you actually go into combat, and it's like, a tenth of the difficulty, because they were prepping you for worst case scenarios all the time. But if you kind of go in there and you're up against, a C-class adversary, and you got the might of the United States Air Force and everything else behind you, it's not as terrible as they
Yeah.
made it out in training, right? So it's all to build up your tolerance for chaos, and then also the judgment that you have to have when everything falls apart. What do? You have to plan for, what are we going to do with what we know? What can we do with what we have? So all of that leads to being more effective as an advisor to high net worth people,
Right.
and
Yeah.
And
it
your
applies to any.
entrepreneurial spirit really came out because you've published all these books. You have 3 business books: Be Nimble, Be Visionary, Be Different. Those are all 3 different books, and 9
Right.
SEAL Strike series novels.
Yeah.
So you are doing it all. But tell us about writing all those books.
Same I guess same sort of mantra or approach to life. When I wrote my first novel, I didn't know how to write a novel, so I started reading everything I could find about it. I went from being clearly dumb on the subject, and so that's fine. So I'm just going to start reading and studying and looking at things and do whatever I have to do and try to get to a point where I can write something,
Mhm.
and
How
go
did
through
you
whatever
do
the
that?
process is.
How did you do it? You just sat down and used your discipline and your training to actually
Sure.
make yourself sit there in front of the computer. How did you do that?
For every one person that's written a novel, there's about 500 that are selling you a book on how to write a novel. So there's
You're right. You're right.
there's no
Yeah,
lack of how these
Mary's
people out
writing a
there.
novel. Mary's writing a novel too. She knows all about the strain.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and I'm not a Navy SEAL.
you start reading the generalist books, and then you start getting into the niche books. How to find a publisher, or how to find an agent, how to find an agent in this subgenre. But you just keep reading and studying, and you listen to webinars and master classes and all that. But I sat down, and if you've been writing, that's all great. It kind of gets you into the zone where you have confidence. You understand the format, and then at some point you have to go, you have to start working it, right?
Yeah.
And I had to write. I mean, everybody goes to school has to write. I had to write in the Navy a lot, under time duress to a certain standard, to be reviewed by senior leaders and all that. So I didn't have a problem with the
Wow.
productivity part of it. I didn't have, or even the discipline of it. I thought, all right, I'll just get up every morning, 5:30, have a cup of coffee, sit down, and I'll write. But everybody's got a different approach to it that works for them. I do a stream of consciousness writing for my novels. I do a very structured, kind of like a storyboard approach to my business books. My business books, I want to pass along certain ideas, thoughts, principles, whatever, and I can't just be all over the place when I'm writing those and just let it happen. Oh, that's an interesting thing. I think I'll throw that in chapter 3. There has to be some kind of a flow to it. So you're taking somebody from where they start to
Mm-hmm.
someplace hopefully that's better. A novel, you don't have to do that. A novel, if Susie walks up to the curb and you're writing, you can say Susie takes a step off the curb. Susie, Michael Jackson moonwalks back from the curb. Susie, suddenly takes off and flies across the street and lands. You can do anything you want to do with Susie. There's no right, wrong, whatever.
You're creating a whole new world.
It's
Yeah.
fiction. You can make
Yeah.
Susie a superhero, right? You can make her a sniper. You can make her a sniper target.
Well,
You can
talking
have
about
somebody
that,
shout.
tell us a little bit about the Steel Strike series. I mean, talk about the subject a little bit.
The first thing, it's not about me. The main character is a facsimile, a profile of pretty much any young officer in any military. Doesn't know a whole lot. Is very concerned about the lack of respect of the enlisted men looking at them, because most of the enlisted people have been in the business for a while, and the officer's the one rookie. They make all kinds of mistakes, rookie mistakes. They overlead, they underlead, they try to become as good as the enlisted guys, or they try to dominate them, or they try to become their friends. These are all kind of classic things. You can go back to World War II movies in the 50s, you'll find the same kind of characters. It's just a standard character thing.
Mhm.
I was an officer after being a SEAL for 10 years, and I was a senior enlisted. I was a chief petty officer, so I was not a rookie officer. I looked like it because I've always looked really young for my age, but as a brand new ensign, I had 10 years of being a SEAL under my belt. So I couldn't write about that because that wouldn't be as interesting. I needed to have
Oh,
a character that had some conflict built in.
Mhm.
But then I evolved him.
Mhm.
I evolved him over the course of the books. And
ah,
in a natural kind of logical way, he had setbacks and all that. And eventually he was kicked out of the Navy because of all of his medical problems, including traumatic brain injury. And then he became suicidal, and then he gets a call from a friend whose daughter's been kidnapped in Hawaii, and he's begging him to do something to help him. And so he ends up getting, right when he's about to, to check out, he gets pulled back into life. So it becomes a big redemption story because now he has a mission. Now he has something of value.
Mhm.
And through that book, he ends up kind of getting his feet back under him and seeing himself in a different light. And then there's a couple books after that. So, and a lot of that was talking to SEALs that have been through that kind of struggle. Human trafficking is what he ends up running
Mhm.
into with the girl. There's a SEAL named Craig Sawyer that has been rescuing kids down in the southwest part of the United States for about the last 10 years. And I
Wow.
called him up and he told me, so he gave me the background research on all that and what's going on globally and in the United States. So I didn't write the novels because I thought I was going to end up doing a research project. But you end up, if you want to have some credibility, unless it's a pure fantasy,
Mhm.
right.
you can't talk about Boston and not describe Boston the right way because people have been to Boston and
Mhm.
then everybody go, that you're
Exactly.
That's
describing
For
LA.
right.
sure.
Yeah.
Right.
For
And it
sure.
Yeah.
gets really bad when you get to equipment and things. So it was free spirited writing on the storyline and in the characters, but research with, if they use the GWIS 5000 radio, I better make sure that actually existed in the time frame and can we look
Right.
at a
Yeah.
picture of it and say, okay, how many antennas does it have? Because I'm going to have to talk to it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you have to do the same type of research, don't you, with your nonfiction? And also, in your book, Be Nimble, you talk about crisis and chaos, as we were talking a little bit about, as opportunities for leaders and frankly, everybody to shine. How do you, aren't those really the hardest moments for a leader to shine?
It's Well, it depends on how you look at leadership. My definition of leadership is that it's not management, and it's been, I guess, blurred over the last 20, 25 years. In bustling business
Mm.
schools, they act like management is the same thing as leadership, and management is what you do when you have systems and processes and people working as designed and as promised. And if something goes wrong, it's usually it's a snag. And what do? You have people that either solve it or you pull out an instruction manual, you follow the procedures because the system's been documented. The person's got
Mhm.
their resume, that's the documentation there. Where leadership is different, and you can be a person with both capabilities. The flip side of the coin of management is when your system blows up on you, when you don't have that system at all, it's not a fix. You don't go oil a spot and walk away and it starts humming again. It's a complete failure. If you haven't been trained or prepared to handle the kind of implications and consequences of that failure, you're just going to sit there on your hands and look around it because you've been given guidance on everything you've been managing. Unless you're the inventor of the machines you're using, I mean, look at a basic office environment. The copier goes
Mhm.
down, and I don't care how many degrees you have. We all stare at each other because we're all hopeless, right? And that's just one little machine. Can you imagine if it's
Right.
something major in an organization? Another one would be, your number one salesperson. And anybody that knows anything about sales, if you have 10 salespeople, it's usually a Pareto thing. There's probably one or two that are bringing in 80% of all your sales, right? So you lose your number
Yeah.
one salesperson. Wow, okay.
Oh.
Immediately you can calculate how much your revenue drops. Then you get another text. They went to our major competitor. Oh man, so you lost market share and you lost revenue.
Right.
And you have to
Mhm.
replace that person And you can't just go on the street and say, you're a top salesperson and you're not, but I'm going to hire you because I know you're. You put them in there and you find out whether they can do it or not, because they all promise they can. So that's leadership, sitting in there and reacting to that impact. Everything about COVID, everything that COVID did to companies, probably more in the April-ish 2020 timeframe, where it wasn't going to only be 2 weeks. And your main supplier all of a sudden shut down. Well, if you only relied on one main supplier, then that's manageable. You can manage your way into redundant, capabilities, but you can't manage your way out of the fact you have zero. You have to react to that by leading. You have to come up with a new plan, a new way. You have to reinvent, reignite everybody's imagination, creativity, and get them in a room, get them emotionally stable, because everybody's reacting to it as a crisis. And that's leadership, to be poised and controlled, maybe a little bit of humor, and then get practical, actually execute something that's constructive. Okay.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you advise people to master disruption in order to survive and thrive? That sounds like this, right?
Sure. So if you were talking about martial arts, the way you would teach somebody to master an attack in a parking lot would be to prepare ahead of time by learning martial arts. There's nothing in the moment that's going to prepare you for it. You need to prepare for that moment ahead of time. So in combat training and in combat special ops training, you do lots and lots of storyboarding, a lot of what ifs, all different kinds of contingencies. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? Okay, if this happens, what are you going to do? If that happens, what are you going to do? If you lose this radio, what are you going to do? You want to go to the backup radio? What if you lose the backup radio? And you get all this stuff, and you're thinking all the time that probably things aren't going to go the way they're planned. And therefore, I have to be thinking 1 or 2 or 3 steps beyond that first failure.
Right.
And then when it's all done, if I know what the job is there a way I can kind of MacGyver this thing and work around and get something together and still get the job done? And that's a mindset that you're taught to follow. Well, that's not the way people in commercial organizations, civilian organizations are taught. They're not taught to be constantly contingency thinking. They're not having boardroom tabletop exercises about, hey, so let's say we lost our number one salesperson. You see, they're not living the potential of the crisis moment.
Right.
So it's more of a crisis moment, and it's more of a crisis because when somebody walks up to them in the parking lot and they realize, I don't know how to defend myself, and it's too late. It's too late. That's how you master disruption on the downside, how to limit the downside impact. You prepare for it. You think about it. You train all your leaders to be thinking about these things in advance, to bring things up, bring things to your attention so you can start to foreshadow certain scenarios and how do we deal with it ahead of time. Let's get 3 vendors instead of the one we have. Let's not be so dependent on the one salesperson. The upside of disruption and mastering disruption is, in business especially, is the and chaos that are happening around you offer essentially a broken field that you can kind of run through, where before you couldn't because there was a whole line of people blocking you. Everything was controlled. All the players were in place, all the rules were in place. And so you couldn't beat them at their rules because they established these rules 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they've been running the thing and they're the master of the rules. And then something shakes it up like an earthquake. And now there's all these little gaps and holes and slots, and the vacuum can be filled by people that are quick-witted, aggressive enough, and can think through a different way to achieve something in the new normal. That's how, and there's every single chaotic event in the United States history. Every one of the major stock market crashes, 2008 and the COVID 2020 being the last two, gave rise to all kinds of new industries, new tech titans. After World War I, after World War II, after the 29 crash, you can go back and if you look up that particular subject that way, you're going to find all these big name companies that you remember that were powerhouses in the 50s and 60s. They were started in some guy's garage, 1934.
Yeah, we talk to people all the time that turned the COVID crisis into a new career. They pivoted, and we started our podcast during that time on Zoom when people started using Zoom. And it was like we talk to people constantly who have done all this, have engineered through it, the entrepreneurs.
Right.
But it's difficult, right?
Yeah,
It's not,
but
it's more difficult because it's not normal to think that way. So it kind of
Yeah.
comes down to your thinking
well, we
again.
haven't been raised that way either.
Well,
Especially
yep.
so many of us in Western society have had it very easy, and they don't even know. You were talking about failure. I mean, dealing with failure. So many people are raised not to even fail ever. And
Hmm.
talk about that. Talk about how do you manage failure and also the fear of it because you have no idea what it looks like. And then also, what about stress? Because a lot of this disruption causes a great deal of stress.
So it's going to sound like I'm just repeating myself, but let's go back to the potential assault in the parking lot. If you are a master, MMA fighter, and somebody's approaching you because they think they're going to be able to beat you up and take your money, and your level of stress on a scale of 1 to 10 is probably a 1. Probably more related to I hope I don't kill this guy because I don't want to go to jail. Not a 10
Yeah.
where this guy's going to kill me. But if you're just the average person standing there, it's probably a 10. The difference between those two reactions to the same stimuli is the preparedness. Now, some of it's physical in that example, but most of it's psychological. So it goes back to what we've been conditioned to by the society, institutions, etc., are to obey the rules, I'm talking intellectual rules, to follow the thought patterns that have been approved, and to strive for stability. And that stability equals safety and security.
Mhm.
And therefore, we've been given kind of a false hope that the universe, which is never static, it's constantly changing. Every molecule is changing something, right? We're given this false impression as humans, because eventually, when you're running a company, you've got that false impression as the CEO of a company too. If you've been raised this way and haven't been trained any other way, you think what your due is if you follow the rules and do all the things you're supposed to do, you've checked all the boxes. You deserve stability, safety, and security.
Hmm.
And so it becomes more of a crisis for that kind of a person when the world doesn't go along with that. When the real
Yeah.
world says, out of the blue, you lost your job. Out of the blue, you found out, your spouse is cheating on you. Out of the blue, you get into a car wreck and you're suddenly laid up in a hospital for 3 months. Because that's what happens every day, all around us, in every place on the planet. It's almost like that way of thinking is a kind of like going, nah, 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 nah. It's a way of trying to ignore the reality by creating a
Yeah.
false reality. So if you recognize that, then you step back and you say, all right. And again, the military is pretty good about training people for this because the battlefield is always chaotic. It's somebody told me one time that when you're planning a mission, they give you all the information, right? So it's kind of like Army man. There'll be 2 guys in front of this door. There'll be one guy over here at this tower. There'll be a road. There'll be a truck, and there'll be all that. And there's a combat veteran. He said, "Yeah, you can plan for all that, and you can come up with a perfect plan of how we're going to do this for those 2 guys. But this is what it's really like. Think about you walk into your kitchen, you turn the light out, and all the cockroaches go, and
Yeah.
there's no cockroaches in half a second, and you don't know where they are.
Yeah.
That's how combat works. The,
Oh.
the first time somebody takes a shot, the 2 guys in front of the door aren't going to be in front of the door anymore. The truck that was coming in isn't going to be there anymore. The guy in the tower is not going to. Everybody's going to do whatever the heck they want to do, however they want to do it, and so your plan is going to go to hell in a handbasket. So you
Hmm.
can't plan for the choreography, whatever the movies show you. It doesn't work that way. Real people panic, and real people do weird things in all walks of life. And so
So does
you have to
does that
prepare
mean
for that.
do you believe that people can learn to lead effectively, or is that a trait people are born with? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you tell
Oh
me.
no, no, you can definitely. All the things we're talking about is a psychology that we've learned, and then psychology we can unlearn. Everything we're talking about
Hmm.
is the reality of the world and examples of crisis, personal or otherwise, and also how you can prepare yourself or prepare a team for the inevitability of that crisis by being conditioned and be thinking in a contingent manner and be always kind of second guessing what could go wrong. And then, okay, if this goes wrong, like that tabletop exercise, then what,
Hmm.
what can we do now? Either to diminish the impact and consequences if it happens.
Well, let's talk about taking risks a little bit because as a former Navy SEAL, you had to know a lot about taking a risk. Talk about taking risks in life and in business.
Yeah, that's a really good segue. So if you're, let's say you're the A person that believes in stability, therefore anything that affects that stability is what?
Causes stress.
A
Chaos.
risk. It's a risk, right?
Ah,
And if you're the B person who has prepared themselves and conditioned themselves in a different way, then there's less risk in life, less risk in business, more opportunity, right?
ah.
So if you are say, the type A person, imagine how they can actually be destructive being risk adverse. They think they're being absolutely, constructive, proactive, and they're reinforcing stability, which is all good, 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 good. A plus grades, right? That person's like a librarian who, according to the Dewey Decimal System, has every book in its place. And the front door is locked because they're not going to let anybody come in and check out a book because that is disruption. It's also a
Yes.
risk to the stability they created. The world is
Mhm.
perfect. My job is to protect this perfection. Then you have another librarian that believes in learning and everything and throws open the door and is behind on putting the books back where they're supposed to be because there's so many people coming in and they're just, loving every minute of it because they're seeing smiling people and people that are learning through this exchange of knowledge and not so much focused on a library as a containment zone for the books. They're inviting disruption because they think this disruption is the change of a person's mind through information and knowledge, which it is. It changes your paradigm. It changes the way what you think. So the risk mitigation from a business standpoint taught as a method or even as a title in some places. Really what you're doing is you're saying, what we want you to do while we're trying to push this company forward, everything else we're doing is we're trying to grow fast, we're trying to get big and all that. We want you to focus all your time on throwing out anchors and throwing out drogue parachutes and doing anything to keep that from happening. Because if we're successful in what we're going to do, we're going to change almost everything we are. And therefore, there's going to be disruption and there's going to be people freaking out about change. And if you and anybody else tries to tell everybody in the company, we can do all these other great things and stay the same, well, then you're lying to them because that's not what's going to happen. So companies that are very dynamic have problems internally because the people internally, if they're told everything is going to be static like the library that's not being used, and suddenly it's not like that. Suddenly it's there's chaos and there's all kinds of crap going on around them, and they're saying, well, we were told the change wouldn't do this. We were told we'd keep our jobs, we'd keep our titles, we'd stay in the same office space, and that was never going to be the truth because you can't do both. You can't try to change and also tell everybody you're not going to change.
What would you like to have our boomer audience have as a takeaway today?
I think that the number one observation for baby boomers, but it's unfortunately it's also for younger people too,
Yes.
is
Well, then,
the idea that success is linear, that there's a football play or plan that you have to do. You got to follow it like a model airplane instructions, and that's the only way you can be successful. And that the path that you start on and the vocation or profession that you get into initially is supposed to be the be all end all. For some reason, our generation, we were taught that. Get good grades, you can get into college, get good grades, get a good job, stay there for 20, 30 years, retire, right? The world is so fractured, but it's filled with so much opportunity. You don't have to follow that game plan. And definitely young people don't. But lots of young people think that, well, if I don't have the master plan for the next 25 years, I'm a failure. And in reality, especially if you're a boomer, if you've lived 5 or 6 or 7 decades, you could have been in a different profession every one of those decades.
right.
In this country, you could have, and when I help SEALs that are getting out, or I did this with the Naval Academy group, I asked somebody, how old are you getting out? He said, I'm 39. I said, okay. How old will you be when you get through law school and become a lawyer? Or how old will you be when you become an engineer after you get through engineering school? He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, it takes 4 years, so add it up. Oh, well, I'll be, 43. And he kind of
Young.
looked at me. Yeah. You could be a brand new lawyer at 43 or a brand new engineer at 43 or a brand new software designer or whatever, because it's not about the old plan anymore. And that's the biggest takeaway, I think. Don't lock yourself psychologically into there. You had one shot at it as a kid or one shot at it as a young person and you blew it. Look at it as I can do anything I want to do. I'll go ahead and do it. And if God comes along and takes me away while I'm doing it, well, so what?
Yeah.
But don't sit static and don't believe all that.
Go to the next. Thank you so much, Marty. That's great advice. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Marty Strong, former Navy SEAL officer, entrepreneur and business leader, author of 12 books, and sought-after speaker. You can learn more about Marty through his website, martystrong.com. Thank you.
And thanks for listening to us. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the Late Boomers podcast and take us along in the car and let us know if we inspired you to take action. Please follow us on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. Tune in next week when we'll be talking to another exciting guest. Thanks so much, Boomers fans, and thank you so much to Marty Strong.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.